The pre-dawn air in Meereen tasted of brick dust and distant smoke. Ser Barristan Selmy stood at the western window of his modest chamber in the Great Pyramid, watching the city emerge from darkness like a drowning man surfacing for breath. The pyramids rose around him, massive and alien, their coloured bricks, red, purple, green, slowly revealing themselves as the sun threatened the horizon. Torches still burned in the lower streets, small points of light that reminded him of stars reflected in still water. Somewhere below, an unsullied patrol moved through the shadows, their bronze caps catching the torchlight. He had not slept. Sleep had become a stranger to him in recent months, an old friend who no longer called. At 63, Barristan found his body betraying him in small ways, the stiffness in his left knee each morning, the way his hands ached before rain. But the sleeplessness was different. That came from within, from the weight of years and choices that pressed down on him like chainmail that could never be removed. Behind him, the chamber was sparse, a bed he rarely used, a table bearing his armour, each piece laid out with the precision of 40 years' habit. His longsword, older than many knights now living, rested in its scabbard against the wall. No tapestries softened these foreign walls, no tokens of home. He had learned long ago not to make himself comfortable in places where he served. Comfort bred complacency, and complacency killed kings, or failed to save them. Barristan turned from the window and began the ritual of dressing. First, the padded gambeson, the quilted layers that would trap heat even in Meereen's warmth. His fingers worked the ties automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 mornings just like this one. Then the mail, ringlets clinking softly in the quiet chamber. He lifted it over his head, felt the familiar weight settle across his shoulders like an old debt coming due. As he fastened the straps of his breastplate, his mind drifted, not forward to the day ahead, but backward to another dawn, another vigil. 43 years ago, the Red Keep. A boy of 23 kneeling through the night in the sept, waiting for dawn and the white cloak that would transform him from Ser Barristan Selmy into something greater, something pure. He had been so certain then. Kneeling before the Father's altar, his vigil sword laid across his palms, he had felt the righteousness of his purpose settle into his bones. He would be a Kingsguard. He would protect the king, uphold the realm, stand as a white shield between the innocent and all that would harm them. The Kingsguard were living legends, and he would join their number. His name would be written in the White Book alongside Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, alongside Ryam Redwine, alongside all the great knights of history. When dawn came and the High Septon draped the white cloak across his shoulders, Barristan had felt like weeping with the honour of it. King Jaehaerys II had smiled at him, frail and kind, and Barristan had sworn his oaths with a voice that did not waver. I swear to ward the king with all my strength, and give my blood for his. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall guard his secrets, obey his commands, ride at his side, and defend his name and honour. Simple words. He had meant every one. Barristan fastened the last buckle of his armour and stood for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Not the armour. That was familiar, almost comforting. The weight of those words, spoken so long ago to a different king in a different kingdom. How many oaths could one man swear before they began to contradict each other? A knock at his door pulled him from memory. "Enter," he called, his voice still strong, despite his years. The door opened to reveal an unsullied soldier, his face smooth and young beneath the bronze-spiked cap. "Ser Barristan," the soldier said in careful common tongue, accented with the hissing consonants of Giscari. "The council convenes at the sunrise bell. The queen requests your presence." "I shall attend her," Barristan replied. The Unsullied bowed with military precision and departed, leaving the door slightly ajar. The queen, Daenerys Targaryen, 14 years old and playing at ruling an ancient city she barely understood. No, that was unfair. She did not play at it. The girl took her rule seriously, perhaps too seriously, and that was part of the problem. She felt every death, every failure, as if they were weights strapped to her small shoulders. He understood that feeling intimately. Barristan left his chamber and descended through the pyramid's corridors. Unsullied soldiers stood at every junction, still as statues, their spears held at identical angles. They did not acknowledge him as he passed, and he preferred it that way. In King's Landing, the guards had always nodded, smiled, whispered "Ser Barristan," with respect, or fear, or both. These soldiers were different. They had been slaves, property, gelded boys trained to fight and die without question. Now they were free, after a fashion, though Barristan wondered if men trained from childhood to obey could ever truly be free. Still, they fought well. They held their discipline, and they did not scheme or plot or sell their loyalty to the highest bidder. In Meereen, surrounded by enemies wearing false smiles, that was worth more than gold. He passed a serving woman in the corridor, a Giscari freedwoman in the simple tunic and sandals that had replaced her slave's collar. She saw him approaching and pressed herself against the wall, her eyes downcast. Fear rippled off her like heat from sand. Barristan slowed his pace, but did not stop. What could he say? That he meant her no harm. She would not believe it. To her, he was a foreign knight in armour, a symbol of the conqueror queen who had upended the only world she had ever known. Whether that world had been just or cruel mattered little. This moment, he was other, and other meant dangerous. The woman hurried past him as soon as he cleared the corridor, her sandals slapping against the brick floor in her haste to be elsewhere. This is not home, Barristan thought, not for the first time. These people will never be your people, no matter how many years you stand their watch. But where was home? Certainly not King's Landing, where Robert Baratheon had cast him aside like a worn cloak. Not Harvest Hall in the Stormlands, the seat of his house, where he had not dwelt since his youth. Home was a fiction, a place that existed only in memory and song. Home was the White Book in the White Sword Tower, where his deeds were recorded in clean script. Ser Barristan Selmy, firstborn son of Sir Lionel Selmy of Harvest Hall, served as a squire to Sir Manfred Swan, knighted in his 16th year by King Aegon V for valour in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, wherein he slew Maelys the Monstrous. The deeds went on, filling nearly 3 pages. They did not mention Duskendale. They did not mention the Mad King's descent, the burnings, the screaming. They did not mention standing silent as Aerys raped his own wife. They did not mention Ned Stark kneeling before Joffrey while the boy king grinned and ordered his death. Perhaps that was for the best. Some truths were too heavy for ink and parchment. The council chamber was already occupied when Barristan arrived. Daenerys sat at the head of a long table of black wood, her silver-gold hair braided in the Dothraki fashion she still favoured. She wore a purple toga wrapped around her small frame, trying to appear regal. And Meereenese, though Barristan thought the garment made her look like a child drowning in her mother's clothes. To her right sat Skarhaz Mokandak, the shave-put, his head shaved smooth in rejection of the traditional Tokari fringe, his face set in its perpetual scowl. Resnak Mo Resnak, the seneschal, perched on her left like a perfumed bird, his fingers adorned with rings. Grey Worm stood near the wall, commander of the Unsullied, his scarred face impassive. "Ser Barristan," Daenerys said, and her voice carried relief. She trusted him, perhaps more than she should. "Please, sit." He took his place at the table, noting the dark circles beneath the young queen's eyes. She had not slept either. "3 more dead last night," Skarhaz said without preamble, his voice rough as stone grinding on stone. "All unsullied, throats cut in the streets near the Temple of the Graces. The sons of the Harpy leave their mark again, the Harpy drawn in blood on the walls." Daenerys closed her eyes briefly. 3 more, she whispered. "Your radiance must act," Resnak interjected, his voice oily with false concern. "The great masters grow restless. They say you cannot keep the peace, that the city bleeds because you set yourself against tradition." "Tradition," Daenerys said, and now her voice held an edge. "They call slavery tradition. They call murder tradition. I will not restore their traditions, Resnak." "Of course not, your worship, of course not, but perhaps compromise. The noble Hizdar Zolorak has suggested that reopening the fighting pits." "Men dying for sport is not compromise," Barristan said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "It is barbarism wrapped in silk." "The pits were sacred to Meereen for 5,000 years, Resnak protested. "Before Gis was Gis." "And now they are closed," Daenerys said, but her voice lacked conviction. Barristan heard the uncertainty, the exhaustion. "We will discuss the pits another time. For now, we must find these harpies and end these killings." "Double the patrols," Skarhaz suggested. "Take hostages from the great masters' families. For every unsullied killed, we kill one of theirs." "No." Daenerys' voice was firm, and for a moment Barristan saw the steel beneath her youth. "I will not become what they accuse me of being. I will not rule through terror." "But you are being ruled by it," Barristan thought. "The harpies kill, and you flinch, and they see your flinch, and know they are winning." He had seen this before. King's Landing, during Robert's rebellion, when the city had seethed with whispers and hidden blades. Before open war, there was always this: the careful violence, the symbolic murders, the testing of resolve. "Your Grace," Barristan said, choosing his words carefully. "The sons of the Harpy do not seek negotiation. They seek your death and the restoration of their old order. No compromise will satisfy them." "Then what would you have me do?" Daenerys asked, and he heard the plea beneath the question. "Tell me how to save them. Tell me how to stop the dying." "I cannot," he thought. "I never could." "Be patient," he said instead. "Trust your Unsullied. Trust Grey Worm. The Harpies are cowards who strike from shadows. Eventually they will make a mistake, and when they do, we will be ready." It was the counsel of an old man who had learned to wait, to endure. He did not know if it was the right counsel. He only knew it was all he had to offer. The meeting continued, spiraling through logistics of grain distribution, reports of disease in the lower districts, petitions from Yunkish envoys. Barristan listened with half his attention, his eyes on Daenerys. She was trying so hard, this child queen, trying to be just, to be merciful, to break the wheel of violence and oppression that had ground Slaver's Bay to dust for millennia. But the wheel was heavy, and she was small, and Barristan feared what would happen when she finally realized she could not lift it alone. Aerys tried to change things too, he remembered. In the beginning, before Duskendale, he had grand visions. He would make the realm prosperous, would build a new age. Then the Darklands took him, and afterward came the wildfire, the burnings, the screaming. But Daenerys was not Aerys. She wept for those who died. Aerys had laughed. That had to mean something. The council ended with nothing resolved, as most councils did. Resnack departed with his mincing walk. Skahaz stormed out muttering threats, and Grey Worm returned to his soldiers. Only Barristan remained, standing near the window, while Daenerys sat slumped in her chair, suddenly looking every bit her 14 years. "I am failing them," she said quietly. "My freedmen. They look to me for protection, and I cannot give it. 3 more last night, Ser Barristan. 3 more who died because they served me. They died because evil men wish to return to evil ways," Barristan said. "That is not your failure, your grace." "Then whose is it?" She looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "I am the queen. Who else can be blamed?" Every king and queen I have ever served asked that question, Barristan thought, and I never had a good answer. "Your Grace," he began, then paused. A knock at the chamber door interrupted him. "Enter," Daenerys called, straightening in her chair, pulling the queen's mask back over the frightened girl. The door opened to reveal an unsullied soldier escorting a young Giscari man, no more than 16, his head shaved in the style of a freedman, his eyes fierce despite the deference in his bow. "Your worship," the boy said in accented common, "I am called Duran. I was property of the great master Grazdan Zopal. You freed me when you took the city. My mother and sister died 2 nights past, killed by the Harpy's sons for speaking your name with gratitude." His voice cracked, but did not break. "I wish to serve you, to fight. I can hold a spear, tend armor, carry water. I will do anything if you will let me stand against those who took my family." Silence filled the chamber. Barristan studied the boy, thin but wiry, hands calloused from labour, eyes burning with the dangerous fire of fresh grief. "Can you read?" Daenerys asked gently. "No, your worship." "Right." "No." "Do you know the ways of knights, the care of armour and weapons?" "I know how to obey," Duran said. "I know how to work. I will learn the rest." Daenerys looked to Barristan. "Ser Barristan, would you take this boy as your squire? Teach him what you can." Barristan opened his mouth to refuse. He was too old to train a squire, especially one who knew nothing of Westerosi ways, who did not even speak the common tongue properly. But then he met Duran's eyes, and saw something that stopped him. Hope. Not the brittle hope of desperation, but the solid hope of purpose. The boy had lost everything, and now he sought meaning in service. Barristan understood that impulse in his bones. "I will train him," he heard himself say, "if he can keep pace." "I will keep pace," Duran said immediately, fiercely. "Then it is settled," Daenerys said, and smiled. The first genuine smile Barristan had seen from her in days. "Duran, you will serve Ser Barristan Selmy, who once stood as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who saved King Aerys II from the Darklands at Duskendale, who has never been defeated in single combat. Learn from him well." The boy's eyes widened, and he looked at Barristan with something approaching awe. Barristan suppressed a sigh. Another one who believes the songs, he thought. Another one who thinks honour and glory are the same thing. Come, boy, Barristan said, gesturing to the door. If you are to be my squire, we begin now. As they left the chamber, Barristan glanced back once at Daenerys. She had returned to her papers, her small shoulders bent under the weight of a city that did not want her mercy. I will teach the boy what I can, Barristan promised silently. And perhaps, in teaching him, I will find what I failed to learn myself. How to serve rightly, how to speak when silence is easier, how to be the knight I swore to be all those years ago in the Red Keep, how to get it right, just once, before the end. The sun had fully risen now, burning away the last shadows from Meereen's coloured brick. Another day, another test, another chance to carry the weight of white cloaks he no longer wore, but could never shed. Barristan descended into the pyramid's depths with his new squire following behind, and above them, the city prepared for whatever fresh horrors the sons of the Harpy would bring when darkness returned. Doran had polished the same pauldron 3 times, and still Ser Barristan said nothing. The old knight sat cross-legged on a reed mat in the corner of his chamber, a whetstone in one hand and his longsword across his lap. The scritch-scritch of stone on steel filled the silence like a meditation, rhythmic and patient. Doran watched from the corner of his eye as he worked the cloth over the armour's surface, trying to understand what he was seeing. This was Barristan the Bold. Barristan who had saved a king, Barristan who had never fallen in combat, whose name was whispered with reverence even in the slave pits where Durin had spent his childhood, where the pit fighters spoke in awed tones of the Westerosi knights and their tourneys. But the man before him looked tired, old. His white hair was thinning at the crown. His hands, though steady on the blade, bore liver spots and old scars. When he had removed his armour after the council meeting, Doran had seen how thin he was beneath the steel, still muscled, still strong, but worn down like a cliff face by years of wind and rain. You are polishing a mirror, not armour, Ser Barristan said, without looking up from his blade. The metal need only be clean and free of rust. Save your effort for when it matters. Doran flushed and set down the cloth. Apologies, sir. I do not know the ways of... You are here to learn. The knight's voice was not unkind. Watch, listen, ask questions when appropriate. The rest will follow. Yes, sir. Ser Barristan lifted the sword, examined the edge in the light filtering through the window, then nodded to himself, and set both blade and stone aside. He stood with a faint grunt, the only acknowledgement of age or discomfort Duran had yet heard from him, and walked to the window. Tell me about your family, the knight said, gazing out at the city. Your mother and sister, how did they die? The question was direct, almost brutal in its simplicity. Duran's throat tightened. He had told the queen they were dead, but he had not spoken of how, had not let himself remember in detail. They walked together to the market, he said slowly. After the queen freed us, my mother, her name was Reza, she wanted to see the market as a free woman, to buy bread with coins she had earned, not grain she was given. My sister Piri went with her. She was only 9 years. Ser Barristan turned slightly, listening. They were near the Temple of the Graces when the sons of the Harpy came. 3 men in masks with knives. They killed the 2 unsullied guards first, then... Duran's voice cracked. He forced himself to continue. The Harpies killed them because my mother wore the Queen's symbol. a bronze pin shaped like a three-headed dragon. She was proud of it. She said it meant she belonged to herself now, not to the great masters. And your father? Died in the pits, years ago, before the Queen came. Ser Barristan was quiet for a long moment. Then, I am sorry for your loss. There are no words that make such pain less. But I can tell you this, your mother was brave. To walk proudly after a lifetime of chains takes more courage than most warriors ever show. The words were simple, but something in the old knight's voice made them feel true. Doran nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Come, Ser Barristan said, moving toward the door. If you are to serve me, you must learn to see what I see. We have work to do. The streets of Meereen in daylight were an assault on senses trained in the quiet dimness of the pits. Doran followed Ser Barristan through the lower districts, trying to match the knight's steady pace. The crowds parted before them, some out of respect, others out of fear, but all giving the armoured Westerosi a wide berth. The morning markets were in full swing, freedmen and former slaves haggling over dried fish and figs, their voices rising in Giscari and the pidgin common that was becoming the language of Daenerys' Meereen. The smells were overwhelming, sweat and spice, grilled snake and honeyed locusts, the sour-sweet stink of the tanneries, the metallic tang of the butcher's stalls. Overhead, the great pyramids loomed like coloured mountains, red and purple and green and gold, each topped with a bronze harpy that seemed to watch the streets with predatory patience. Ser Barristan moved through it all with barely a glance at the commerce, his eyes scanning rooftops, alleys, the spaces between buildings, where shadow pooled despite the sun. He walked like a man in enemy territory, which, Doran supposed, he was. They turned down a narrower street, away from the market's chaos, and the crowds thinned. Here the buildings pressed close, blocking the sun, creating corridors of cool shadow. Doran recognized the area. This was near where his mother and sister had died. Ser Barristan stopped at an intersection where three streets met. Dried blood still stained the bricks, dark brown against the faded red. Someone had tried to scrub the harpy symbol from the wall, but the outline remained, a ghost of the sun's work. This is where the Unsullied were killed last night, the knight said, crouching beside the bloodstain. His knees popped audibly. 3 soldiers, throats cut. He pointed to the alley mouth to the left. The killers came from there. You can see where they waited, the scuff marks, the way the dust is disturbed. 2 men, perhaps 3. Doran looked but could not see what Ser Barristan described. The ground looked like ground. The alley like any other. The Unsullied were walking patrol, the knight continued, standing, 3 abreast, which is too many for these narrow streets. They cannot fight effectively in close quarters when bunched together. The harpies waited until the patrol was in the intersection, then struck from behind and the sides simultaneously. How do you know this? Because it is what I would do. Ser Barristan's blue eyes were distant, seeing something beyond the street. A patrol moving in formation has a rhythm, a pattern. The soldiers watch the street ahead, the buildings beside them. They rarely watch behind. That is where their brothers are. That is the weakness. Strike from the rear, strike fast, disappear before reinforcements arrive. He walked to the alley mouth and peered into its darkness. The killers fled this way, probably split up, removed their masks, became ordinary Meereenese again within minutes. They are not warriors, boy. They are murderers who know their city better than we ever will. Then how do we stop them? We adapt. Smaller patrols, 2 men instead of 3, random routes instead of patterns. We make them uncertain, make them hesitate. And we watch. The knight turned back to Duran. This is not the first time I have seen such tactics. You fought the sons of the Harpy before, in Westeros. A thin smile crossed Ser Barristan's weathered face. Not the Harpies, but I have seen rebellion before it becomes war. The whispers, the knives in the dark, the symbols painted in blood to spread fear. It is always the same, in every city, every kingdom. The powerless strike at power, and power strikes back, and the wheel turns until someone breaks it, or everyone is broken. They walked further into the warren of streets, Ser Barristan pointing out other kill sites, other places where the suns had struck. Duran began to see the pattern, always near temples, always where crowds gathered and dispersed, always locations where the killers could vanish quickly into the surrounding buildings. They know we cannot station soldiers everywhere, the knight said. Meereen is too large, and we have too few men, so they strike where we are weakest, when we are most exposed, and they make every murder a message. You are not safe. Your queen cannot protect you. The old ways will return. But the queen will not let the old ways return, Duran said fiercely. She freed us. She broke our chains. Ser Barristan stopped walking and looked at the boy. I know, and that is why they will keep killing until they make her change, or until she is dead, or until they are. There is no middle path here, Duran. The great masters will accept nothing less than the return of slavery, and your queen will grant nothing that resembles it. So the killing continues. You speak as if you have seen this before, Duran said carefully. Not just rebellion, but a queen who tried to change things, and those who would not let her. The old knight's expression shuttered, and for a moment Duran thought he had overstepped. But then Ser Barristan sighed, a sound like wind through empty armour. I have served kings and queens for 40 years, he said quietly. I have seen many try to change the world. Some succeed. Most fail. The question is never whether they try. It is whether they have the strength to endure the cost of trying. Before Duran could ask what he meant, a shout echoed from the street ahead. Both of them turned, Ser Barristan's hand dropping instinctively to his sword hilt. A crowd had gathered near the Temple of the Graces, freedmen and former slaves pressing together, their voices rising in anger and fear. Duran and the knight pushed through to the centre of the commotion. Another body, another unsullied, his throat opened ear to ear, his spear broken beside him. The bronze cap had been removed and placed on his chest, filled with blood like an offering bowl. On the wall behind the corpse, painted in that same blood, was the harpy symbol, larger than any Duran had seen before, its wings spread wide as if in triumph. Ser Barristan knelt beside the body, his face grim. This one was killed in daylight, he murmured. They grow bolder. The crowd's anger built like a wave, preparing to crash. Duran heard the shouts. The queen does nothing. We are murdered in the streets. Where are our protectors? The great masters laugh at us. Ser Barristan stood and raised his voice, and though he did not shout, something in his tone cut through the chaos. This soldier will be avenged. The queen knows of these killings. She grieves for each one. Justice will come. When? A voice called from the crowd. How many more must die? The knight had no answer. Duran watched his face and saw something that surprised him. Doubt. Barristan the Bold, who had never been defeated, who had saved kings and slain monsters, did not know what to say to a crowd of frightened freedmen who wanted only to live without fear. "Justice will come," Ser Barristan repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to Duran's ears. They left the crowd to its grief and anger, walking back toward the Great Pyramid in silence. Duran wanted to ask questions, wanted to know what Ser Barristan had meant about other kings, other rebellions. But the knight's face was closed, lost in thought or memory. The council chamber was cold, despite the afternoon heat, when they returned. Queen Daenerys stood at the window, her back to the room, while Resnak Mo Resnak wrung his bejeweled hands, and Skahaz Mo Kandak paced like a caged shadow cat. Grey Worm stood at attention near the door, his scarred face expressionless. 4 more, the Queen said without turning. 4 in 2 days. How many more, Ser Barristan? How many more of my children must die before we find these cowards? "We are increasing patrols, Your Grace," Skahaz growled. "But the city is vast, and the suns are like smoke." "Then take hostages from the great masters," Daenerys said, and now she turned, and Duran saw tears on her face. "Take their sons, their daughters, make them feel what my freedmen feel." "Your radiance, please," Resnak begged. "Such action would..." "Would what? Anger them? They are already trying to kill us. What more can they do?" "They can unite," Ser Barristan said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but if you take hostages from the great masters, you give them a cause to rally behind. Right now, the sons of the Harpy act in secret, in shame, make martyrs of their children, and they will act openly. You will have civil war, not hidden knives." "Then what would you have me do?" Daenerys' voice broke. "Tell me, Ser Barristan. You have served kings before me. What would they do?" Aerys would have burned them all, Barristan thought, but did not say. Robert would have crushed them without thought for who was innocent. Joffrey would have made a spectacle of their deaths and called it justice. "I would have you be patient," he said instead. "Be watchful. Trust your soldiers and your advisors. The sons will make a mistake, and when they do..." "Patience." Daenerys laughed, a bitter sound. "How many must die while I am patient?" Silence filled the chamber. Duran stood near the door with Grey Worm, feeling like an intruder on a moment too heavy for a former slave to witness. "Hisdar zo Lorak has made an offer," Resnak said into the quiet. "If the Queen would consent to hear it." "Hisdar zo Lorak is the son of a slaver," Skahaz spat. "His words are poison wrapped in honey." "His words offer peace," Resnak countered. "He suggests a union, a marriage between her worship and himself, to bind the old families to the new order, and the reopening of the fighting pits, to give the people their traditions while maintaining." "No," Daenerys said, "I will not marry a man I do not love to appease murderers, and I will not reopen the pits." But Duran heard the uncertainty in her voice. He had been a slave long enough to know when someone was bargaining with themselves, trying to find a price they could bear to pay. "Your Grace," Ser Barristan said, and his voice held something Duran could not name, warning, perhaps, or fear. "Do not compromise your principles for temporary peace. I have seen what happens when rulers sacrifice what they believe for what seems expedient. It never ends where they think it will. And I have seen what happens when rulers are too stubborn to bend," Daenerys shot back. "They break, Ser Barristan, and their people break with them." The Queen turned back to the window, dismissing them all with her posture. "Leave me. I must think." They filed out in silence, Resnack scurrying, Skahaz storming, Grey Worm marching with military precision. Ser Barristan moved slowly, his shoulders heavy, and Duran followed. In the corridor outside, the knight stopped and leaned against the wall. For the first time since Duran had met him, Ser Barristan looked old, not just aged, but weary, in a way that went deeper than tired muscles. "You served the Mad King," Duran said. It was not a question. Ser Barristan looked at him sharply. "I did. The freedmen tell stories. They say King Aerys burned people alive, that he laughed while they screamed. The freedmen tell truth." The knight's voice was flat. "Aerys Targaryen was called the Mad King for reason. But you served him. You protected him." "I did. Why?" Ser Barristan was quiet for so long that Duran thought he would not answer. Then, "Because I swore an oath. Because I was young and believed that honor meant obedience. Because I told myself that it was not my place to question kings, only to serve them." He looked at Duran, and his blue eyes were haunted. "Because I was a coward, boy. I stood in my white cloak, and I did nothing while a man I had sworn to protect became a monster. And when Robert Baratheon came with his warhammer, part of me was relieved. At least then the choice was taken from me." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and painful. "Is that why you serve Queen Daenerys?" Duran asked. "To make up for serving the Mad King?" "Perhaps." Ser Barristan pushed off from the wall. "Or perhaps I am just an old man trying to serve one last ruler who might deserve the service. Your queen is young and flawed and makes mistakes. But she weeps for the dead, Duran. She loses sleep over every life lost. That is not madness. That is not cruelty. That is—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "Hope," Duran finished. "Yes, hope." Ser Barristan smiled, sad and small, though I fear she's learning what hope costs in a place like this. They returned to the knight's chamber, where Duran resumed his work on the armour, and Ser Barristan returned to his sword and stone. The scritch-scritch filled the silence again, patient and rhythmic. But now Duran understood what he was seeing. Not Barristan the Bold from the songs. Not the legendary knight who had never fallen. Just an old man trying to get it right this time, haunted by all the times he had not. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, and in the streets below, the sons of the Harpy prepared for another night's work. The screaming started in Barristan's dreams and followed him into waking. He sat up in the darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner testing the bars of a cage. Sweat soaked his sleeping shirt, despite the cool night air filtering through the window. For a moment he did not know where he was. The room was wrong, the smells were wrong, the quality of the darkness was wrong. Then memory settled over him like a shroud. Meereen, the Great Pyramid. He was 63 years old, and the screaming was only in his head, an echo from 4 decades past that had never truly faded. Aerys, always Aerys. Barristan stood, his knee protesting, and walked to the window. The city spread below him, dark save for scattered torches and the glow of braziers atop the pyramids. Somewhere in those shadows, the sons of the Harpy were moving, plotting, killing. Somewhere, Daenerys lay sleepless in her chambers, trying to decide if she would sacrifice her principles to buy a peace that would not last. History repeats itself, Barristan thought. We wear different faces, speak different words, but we dance the same steps our fathers danced. He should try to sleep. Dawn would come too soon, bringing another day of patrols and councils and the slow erosion of a young queen's certainty. But sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant Duskendale, and Duskendale meant the screaming, always the screaming. Barristan poured water from a clay pitcher into a cup, drank it down in 3 swallows, then poured another. His hands were steady. That was something. In the early years after Duskendale, his hands had shaken for months, trembling like a palsied old man's whenever he let his guard down. He had hidden it well. Kingsguard did not show weakness. But alone in his chambers, he had stared at his traitorous fingers and wondered if he was going mad like his king. He had not gone mad, but he had learned to live with ghosts. Stop, he told himself. The past is done. Focus on the present, on Daenerys, on keeping her from repeating Aerys's mistakes. But the past would not be dismissed so easily. It never was. And as Barristan stood at the window watching Meereen's darkened streets, his mind drifted backward, despite his resistance, pulled by currents stronger than will. Duskendale, 277 AC, spring. Barristan had been 29 then, in his prime, already legendary for his victory over Malus the Monstrous in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. He had worn the white cloak for 6 years and had never failed in his duty, never faltered, never questioned. King Aerys II was not yet mad, not truly. Capricious, yes. Suspicious, certainly. But still recognizably the man who had taken the throne 13 years earlier with such promise, such vision. There were whispers about his growing paranoia, about the way he saw treachery in every shadow. But Barristan had dismissed them. Kings must be suspicious. It was the nature of the crown. Lord. Dennis Darklyn of Duskendale had refused to pay certain taxes, had made demands regarding the status of his port town, a minor rebellion, barely worth the name. Tywin Lannister, serving as hand, had counselled patience and negotiation, but Aerys had grown tired of Lannister's caution, tired of being managed like a child. "I am the king," Aerys had said, his voice sharp. "I will not negotiate with a rebellious bannerman like some merchant haggling over the price of fish. I will go to Duskendale myself. I will remind Lord Darklyn who rules the 7 kingdoms." It was folly. Barristan had known it was folly. So had the other Kingsguard who accompanied them, Sir Gawain Gaunt, Sir Harlan Grandison. But they were sworn to obey, not to counsel. That was the hand's role. That was the small council's role. The Kingsguard existed to protect the king's body, not to question his judgment. They had ridden to Duskendale with a small escort. Too small, Barristan had thought even then. But Aerys wanted to move quickly, to catch Darklyn off guard. They had entered the town without ceremony, and Lord Darklyn had received them in his hall with courtesy that had tasted false. Barristan had felt it immediately. The wrongness in the air, the way the Darklyn guards stood too close, too ready. He had moved nearer to the king, his hand hovering near his sword hilt. "Your Grace," Lord Darklyn had said, bowing low, "you honour my humble town with your presence. Though I confess, I am surprised you came with so few guards. Duskendale can be treacherous for those unfamiliar with its streets." A warning, a threat. Barristan had seen Sir Gawain stiffen beside him. "I need no army to visit my own subjects," Aerys had replied coldly. "Though it seems I was right to doubt your loyalty, Lord Darklyn, if you think to threaten your king in his own realm." "No threat, your grace, merely an observation. You see, the thing about kings—" Darklyn's voice had hardened. "Is that they are only kings when men agree to call them so. And in Duskendale, I am wondering if we might not prefer a different arrangement." The Darklyn guards had moved then, a wall of steel suddenly surrounding them. Barristan had drawn his sword, as had Gawain and Harlan, but they were 3 against 40, and the king stood exposed between them. "Seize them!" Darklyn had commanded. The fight had been brief and brutal. Barristan had cut down 5 men, his blade singing, as it always did, in his hands, each strike perfect, each movement precise. Sir Gawain had taken down 3 before a mace caught him in the temple, and he fell. Sir Harlan had fought his way to the king's side, shield raised, buying seconds with his life. But there were too many. Always too many. A blade had opened Barristan's shoulder. Another had struck his helm, ringing his skull like a bell. He had stumbled, vision blurring, and when it cleared he was on his knees, with a dozen swords pointed at his throat. And King Aerys II Targaryen stood in chains. "The Kingsguard," Darklyn had said, walking among them. Sir Harlan was dead, his head split open, Sir Gawain unconscious. Not so legendary as the songs claim. Take them to the cells, and bring the king to the tower. We will keep him comfortable while we negotiate new terms with the Hand. They had been imprisoned for half a year, 6 months in darkness and filth, listening to Aerys scream. Barristan closed his eyes, his forehead pressed against the cool stone of the window frame. Even now, 43 years later, he could hear those screams. They had started within the first week. Lord Darklyn had not been cruel by nature, not like his wife, Lady Serala, the lace serpent they called her. It was Serala who had persuaded her husband to take the king captive, Serala who had whispered poison in Aerys's ear during those months. She had mocked him, questioned his manhood, suggested that his lords and wife plotted against him, that even the Kingsguard had known of the trap and allowed it to happen. Lies. All lies. But Aerys had listened, and Aerys had believed, and Aerys had begun to change. Barristan had been held in a cell far from the king, but sound carried in the dun fort's old stones. He had heard Aerys weeping in the night, heard him shouting accusations at phantoms, heard the silence that was somehow worse than the noise, the silence when the king's mind cracked and reformed into something new, something sharp and broken and deadly. And Barristan had lain in his cell, healing from his wounds, and done nothing. Because what could he do? The door was locked. The guards were many. He was one man, injured, imprisoned. But that was a lie he told himself. The truth was simpler. He had been relieved. Relieved that for once his duty was clear. Survive, wait, trust that rescue would come. He did not have to watch Aerys destroy himself. Did not have to stand silent while the king made catastrophic decisions. Did not have to be complicit in madness he could not stop. In that cell, Barristan's honour had been simple again. All he had to do was endure. The rescue came in the 6th month. Barristan never learned all the details of how Tywin Lannister had negotiated, what threats he had made, what forces he had gathered. He only knew that one night the guards came for him, unlocked his cell, and told him the Hand was offering terms. But the negotiations had fallen apart. Darklyn had panicked, realizing too late that Aerys would never forgive this insult, that mercy was not possible. He had ordered the king killed rather than let him be rescued. Barristan had heard the order being shouted through the fort, had heard the guards running toward the tower where Aerys was held, had seen his moment. He had killed the 2 guards escorting him with his bare hands, broke the first one's neck, smashed the second into a wall until the man stopped moving, had taken a sword from the corpse, had run through the Dunfort like a man possessed, cutting down anyone who stood between him and his king. Later, they would call it heroic. Barristan the Bold, saving his king against impossible odds. They would write it in the White Book in glowing terms. They would sing songs. But Barristan remembered only the fear that he would fail, that Aerys would die, that his moment of relief in that cell would become the defining failure of his life. He had found the king in the tower's uppermost chamber, surrounded by 7 guards, with Ser Simon Hollard holding a knife to the royal throat. Barristan had fought them all, driven by something beyond skill or training, by desperation, by shame, by the need to prove that he had not failed, would not fail, could not fail. He killed all 7. Simon Hollard last, gutting him with a stroke that spilled the knight's entrails across the floor. Aerys had watched it all with wild eyes. Barristan, the king had whispered. Good Barristan, loyal Barristan, the only one I can trust. They all betrayed me, but not you. Never you. And Barristan had knelt before his king in a room filled with corpses and said the words he would regret for the rest of his life. Never, your grace. I am yours until death. Barristan opened his eyes and stared out at sleeping Meereen. After Duskendale, Aerys had never been the same. The paranoia that had been a whisper became a roar. He saw plots everywhere, enemies in every face, betrayal in every word. He stopped trusting his advisors, stopped listening to his hand. He began the burnings. Wildfire. Always wildfire. Burn them all, Aerys would say, watching men roast in emerald flames. Let them see what happens to traitors. And Barristan had stood in his white cloak and done nothing, because he had sworn an oath, because he had saved Aerys at Duskendale, and how could he condemn a man he had risked everything to rescue? Because he told himself that it was not the Kingsguard's place to judge kings, only to protect them, because he was a coward. Years later, when Jaime Lannister had driven his sword through Aerys's back, when Barristan had arrived to find his king dead and the Kingslayer sitting on the Iron Throne, his first emotion had been rage. Rage at Jaime for breaking his oath, for betraying everything the White Cloak stood for. His second emotion, when the rage cleared, had been relief and shame at feeling relieved. A sound from the corridor brought Barristan back to the present. He turned from the window, his hand instinctively moving toward where his sword rested against the wall. Ser Barristan? A voice from outside his door, Duran's voice, uncertain. Are you awake? There is news. The Queen has called an emergency council. Barristan crossed to the door and opened it. Duran stood there in a simple tunic, his eyes worried in the torchlight. What has happened? Barristan asked. 2 more unsullied dead, and a fire in the granaries. The suns burned one of the grain stores. The Queen is... The boy trailed off. The Queen is... What? Afraid, I think. She asked for you specifically. Barristan nodded and began donning his armour. Duran helped, the boy's hands now familiar with the straps and buckles after several days of service. As they worked, Barristan's mind turned over the news. The Harpies were escalating, moving from targeted killings to sabotage. They were testing Daenerys, pushing to see where she would break. He knew what would happen next. He had seen it before. The Queen would be presented with options, none of them good. Make peace with the great masters by compromising her principles. Respond with violence and risk becoming what she fought against. Continue as she was and watch her freedmen die one by one while her stores burned and her support crumbled. Aerys had faced similar choices once, before Duskendale. After Duskendale, he had stopped seeing choices at all, only enemies to be burned. "Duran," Barristan said, as the boy fastened the last strap of his breastplate, "what do you know of Hisdar zo Lorak?" The question seemed to surprise the boy. "He is old blood, great master's son. They say he speaks honeyed words to the queen while his cousins wear harpy masks at night." "Do you believe that?" Duran hesitated. "I believe he wants the old ways back. All of them do. But Hisdar is clever enough to smile while he plots. The queen should not trust him. And if she marries him, if she thinks it will stop the killing, then she will be betrayed." Duran's voice was certain. "Men like Hisdar do not change, sir. They wait, they pretend, and when the moment comes, they put the knife in your back." Barristan studied the boy's face and saw the certainty born of a lifetime in chains. Duran knew masters in a way Barristan never could. The boy had learned to read the subtle signs of treachery, the small tells that meant the difference between survival and death. "Come," Barristan said, "let us see what the queen decides." The council chamber was chaos when they arrived. Skahaz Mo Kandak and Resnak Mo Resnak were shouting at each other, the Shavepate's bald head gleaming with sweat, while the seneschal's rings flashed as he gesticulated wildly. Grey Worm stood silent near the wall, his face carved from stone. And Daenerys sat at the head of the table, her face pale, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep, or both. "Enough!" she shouted, and the room fell silent. "I will hear Ser Barristan's counsel. The rest of you, be quiet." All eyes turned to Barristan. He felt the weight of their expectations. Skahaz wanting blood, Resnak wanting compromise, Grey Worm wanting orders, Daenerys wanting salvation. He had no salvation to offer. "Your Grace," he began carefully, "what exactly is being proposed?" "Hisdar zo Lorak has sent another message," Resnak said before Daenerys could speak. "He offers terms. If her radiance will consent to wed him, the killings will stop. The great masters will swear fealty, the city will have peace, and in exchange the fighting pits will reopen, not for slaves, but for free men who choose to fight. A compromise that honors both the old ways and the new." "Lies," Skahaz spat. "Lies wrapped in silk. The moment she weds one of them, she is finished. They will poison her or smother her in her sleep, or they will honor the agreement," Resnak interrupted. "Hisdar is a man of his word. I have known him since." "I don't care," Daenerys said, her voice flat. "I don't care about your history with him, Resnak. I care about my freedmen who are dying. I care about the grain that is burning. I care about holding this city until—" She trailed off. "Until what, Your Grace?" Barristan asked gently. "Until I understand how to rule it," she finished, and her voice was small. Silence settled over the chamber like snow. Barristan looked at the young queen, 14 years old, trying to hold together a city that did not want her mercy, fighting enemies she could not see, making choices that would haunt her for the rest of her life. He saw Aerys in her eyes, not the madness, never the madness, but the isolation, the weight, the slow realization that the crown did not make you strong, it made you alone. "Your Grace," Barristan said, "may I speak ye plainly? Please. I served a king once who compromised his principles to buy peace. He thought if he just gave his enemies a little of what they wanted, they would stop. But they never stopped. They only asked for more. And each compromise made him weaker, until he had nothing left to compromise except his soul. Daenerys looked at him with those violet eyes, and he saw her understanding. "You think I should refuse," she said. "I think you should do what you believe is right and be prepared to live with the consequences. But I also think that once you start trading pieces of yourself for peace, you discover that peace requires more pieces than you have to give. So I should let my people die, let the granaries burn, watch everything I've built crumble. No, Your Grace, you should fight. Differently than you have been, perhaps, but fight. The sons of the Harpy are not an army. They are murderers who hide behind masks. But they can be found. They can be stopped. It will take time, and blood, and patience. I am tired of patience." Daenerys stood, her voice rising. "I am tired of watching people die while I sit here being patient. Maybe Hizdahr is a liar. Maybe he will betray me. But at least he offers hope that the killing will stop. Hope built on surrender is not hope, Your Grace. It is despair wearing a pleasant mask. And hope built on what? On waiting for the Harpies to make a mistake. On watching my freedmen cut down in the streets. On losing this city piece by piece until there is nothing left to rule." Tears were flowing now, streaking her face. "I am trying, Ser Barristan. I am trying to be just, to be merciful, to be the queen my people deserve. But maybe I am not strong enough. Maybe I need help, even if it comes from someone I do not trust." Barristan wanted to tell her she was wrong, wanted to tell her she was strong enough, wise enough, that she just needed to hold firm a little longer. But he had told Aerys similar things once, and Aerys had not listened, and the realm had burned. "The choice is yours, Your Grace," he said finally. "It must be. But I beg you to remember, the moment you compromise who you are to keep your crown, you discover the crown is no longer worth keeping." Daenerys stared at him, and he saw something shift in her eyes. Hurt, anger, disappointment, that he did not have better answers, that he could not save her from this choice. "Leave me," she said, "all of you. I must think." They filed out in silence. In the corridor, Skahaz stalked away, muttering threats. Reznak hurried off to send another message to Hizdahr. Grey Worm returned to his soldiers. Only Barristan and Duran remained, standing in the empty hallway. "What will she do?" Duran asked. Barristan closed his eyes and saw Aerys sitting on the Iron Throne, laughing as men burned, saw Robert Baratheon dismissing him with a wave, saw Joffrey's smile as Ned Stark's head rolled. "She will do what she thinks she must," he said, "and we will serve her as best we can, and pray that this time it is enough." But he had prayed before, and prayer had never been enough to stop the wheel from turning, the pattern from repeating, history from devouring those who could not learn from it. In his dreams that night, Barristan heard screaming again, but this time he could not tell if the voice was Aerys's or Daenerys's or his own. The bloody flux came to Meereen on the backs of Astapori refugees, and it came hungry. Duran first heard of it from a freedwoman in the markets, whispered words about people dying in the refugee camps outside the city walls, their bodies voiding blood and water until there was nothing left. He had not believed it at first. Disease was always present in Meereen, especially among the poor. But this was different, the woman insisted. This was not the ordinary dysentery that killed the old and the young. This was something worse. By the time he reported it to Ser Barristan 3 days later, the first cases had appeared inside the city. "How many dead?" the knight asked, his face grim as he fastened his sword belt. "6 that I have heard of, sir. But there may be more. The healers at the temple are overwhelmed. People are afraid to report illness, afraid they will be... Duran searched for the word. Separated from their families. Quarantined, Barristan supplied. Come, we need to see this for ourselves. They descended into Meereen's lower districts as the morning sun climbed higher, turning the coloured brick pyramids into pillars of flame, red and purple and gold. But the beauty of the architecture could not disguise what was happening in the streets below. The markets were quieter than usual, the crowds thinner. Those who walked the streets moved quickly, eyes downcast, as if the sickness might be caught through a glance. The Temple of the Graces sat at the heart of the district, its domed roof topped with a bronze harpy that seemed to watch the suffering below with predatory interest. Outside the temple's entrance, a line of sick and dying stretched down the steps and into the street. Duran could smell it before they drew close. The sharp, foul reek of bloody flux, of bodies surrendering their contents, of death approaching on swift feet. Ser Barristan stopped at the edge of the crowd, his hand resting on his sword hilt, not in threat, but in unconscious habit, a warrior's reflex in the presence of an enemy he could not fight with steel. "Stay close," he told Duran. "Touch nothing. If you feel ill, tell me immediately." They pushed through the crowd. People parted before the armoured knight like water before a ship's prow. Inside the temple, the scene was chaos, wrapped in the thin veneer of order. Grace women in their veils moved among the sick, offering water and herbal remedies that did little to slow the disease. The floor was slick with filth. The air was thick with moans and prayers offered to gods who did not seem to be listening. A Grace approached them, her veil stained with blood, and worse. "Ser Barristan," she said, recognizing him, "you should not be here. The Pale Mare rides swift through these halls." "The Pale Mare?" Duran asked. "It is what the Astapori called it," the Grace explained, "because it makes the sick pass blood and water like a horse's droppings, until they are empty husks. We have no cure. We can only make them comfortable while they die." "How many infected?" Barristan asked. "Here in the temple? Perhaps 40. But there are more in the camps, more in the streets. The disease spreads through the water, we think, or perhaps through touch. We do not know." The Grace's voice held the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for days. "The Queen has sent what medicines she can, but there are not enough. There will never be enough." Barristan nodded slowly. "I will speak with her Grace. We will need to organize a proper quarantine, separate the sick from the healthy, ensure clean water reaches those districts that are still untouched." "A quarantine?" The Grace's laugh was bitter. "How do you quarantine half a city, sir? The flux is already inside our walls, already spreading through our streets. You might as well try to quarantine the air we breathe." But Barristan was already moving, his mind shifting into the tactical mode Duran had seen during their patrols. The knight walked through the temple, studying the layout, asking questions of the Graces about numbers and supplies and the progression of symptoms. He did not flinch from the suffering around him, did not cover his nose against the stench, did not shy away from the dying. Duran followed, trying to match the old knight's composure, but his stomach churned. He had seen death before, had lived in the pits where men killed each other for sport. But this was different. This was death that came not through violence, but through invisible corruption. Death that couldn't be fought or fled or reasoned with. As they left the temple, Duran sucked in the outside air like a drowning man surfacing. "Will the Queen be able to stop it?" he asked. "No," Barristan said simply. "The flux will run its course. All we can do is try to limit its spread, care for the dying, and pray that it burns itself out before it consumes the city." "You have seen this before? In Westeros?" "I have seen plague, yes. Not the bloody flux, but other diseases. They come in waves, take what they will, and leave the survivors to bury the dead." The knight's voice was matter of fact, but Doran heard the weight beneath the words. "It is another enemy the Queen must face, and one she cannot defeat with mercy or justice or compromise." Over the following days, Ser Barristan transformed. Doran watched as the old knight, who had seemed haunted and uncertain in the council chambers, became something else. A general, a commander, a man who had fought in enough wars to know that battles were won through organization and discipline, not through heroic gestures. Barristan organized the Unsullied into work details, moving through the lower districts with buckets of lime and torch in hand. Buildings where the flux had taken hold were marked with red paint. The sick were moved to designated areas, not the temple, which was overwhelmed, but empty warehouses and abandoned manses that had belonged to great masters who fled when Daenerys took the city. The work was brutal. Men who had been trained to stand in formation and thrust spears now hauled corpses and scrubbed floors. Some refused at first, said it was beneath them, that they were soldiers, not servants. Grey Worm spoke to them in his flat voice, and they returned to work. Barristan walked through the plague districts without fear, an old man in armour moving through streets where younger men would not go. Doran followed, because he had sworn to serve, and because he would not shame himself by showing fear when his knight showed none. "Why do you do this?" Doran asked one afternoon, as they supervised the cleaning of a tenement where 7 people had died in a single night. "You are Kingsguard. You should be protecting the Queen, not this." Barristan paused in his work. He had been helping carry buckets of lime, his armour removed, his shirt soaked with sweat despite his age, and looked at the boy. "The Queen is protected by her Unsullied in the pyramid," he said, "but her people down here are dying, and if I cannot stop the dying, I can at least bear witness to it. I can show them that she has not forgotten them." He hoisted another bucket. "Besides, boy, I am old. If the flux takes me, it will be years sooner than I deserve, and I will have died doing something useful. You do not fear death." "Of course I fear it. Only fools do not fear death." Barristan poured the lime over a section of floor where blood had pooled. The white powder hissed and smoked as it met the fluids. "But I fear dying badly more than I fear dying. And dying in my bed, comfortable and useless while others suffer? That would be a bad death indeed." In the evenings, when the worst of the day's work was done, Doran would sit with Ser Barristan in the knight's chamber, and they would speak. Sometimes about the day's events. How many dead? How many new cases? Whether the quarantine was holding. But often about other things, about Westeros and the wars Barristan had fought, about the nature of service and duty. One night, after a day that had seen 15 more deaths in the lower districts, Doran asked the question that had been burning in him since the temple. "Why do you serve the Queen, truly?" Barristan looked up from the sword he was oiling, the blade that had killed more men than Doran would ever know, and seemed to consider the question seriously. "I told you before," he said slowly, "because she is different, because she tries to be just." But is that enough? After everything you have seen, everything you have endured, why give yourself to another ruler who may fail, who may become everything you fear?" The knight set down his blade and oiled cloth. Outside the window, Meereen's evening bells were ringing, calling the faithful to prayer at temples throughout the city. The sound was mournful, like the tolling of funeral bells. "Do you know what Robert Baratheon said to me when he dismissed me from the Kingsguard?" Barristan asked. Duran shook his head. He said, "You served the Mad King well, but you were too old to serve him, and you are too old to serve me. Go home, Ser Barristan. Rest. Enjoy what years you have left." And then he replaced me with his unworthy brother, a man who had never earned a white cloak, who bought his position with family connections and gold. The bitterness in Barristan's voice was sharp as broken glass. "I went to the throne room afterward," the knight continued, "stood before the iron throne where I had stood for so many years, and I realized that I had spent my entire life serving kings who did not deserve my service. Aerys, who burned men for his pleasure. Robert, who dismissed me like a used servant. And before them, other kings, some good, some bad, most indifferent to the men who stood watch while they slept. So why serve again? Because I finally understand what I should have understood 40 years ago." Barristan leaned forward, his blue eyes intense in the lamplight. "The oath does not make the service holy. The person you serve does. I wasted decades protecting men who were not worth protecting, telling myself that the white cloak absolved me of judgment, that duty meant obedience without question. But I was wrong." He picked up his sword again, studied his reflection in the blade's polished surface. "When Joffrey took the throne, that boy, that cruel child, I served him because technically the oath demanded it. I stood in my white cloak and watched him torment Sansa Stark, watched him order Ned Stark's head removed, and I did nothing because I had already compromised myself so thoroughly that one more atrocity barely registered." "But you left," Duran said. "I was dismissed. Again. This time by Cersei Lannister, who wanted younger men around her son, men she could control." Barristan's laugh was humorless. "She did me a kindness, though she meant it as an insult. She freed me to finally choose who I would serve, rather than being assigned to whoever wore the crown." "And you chose Queen Daenerys." "I chose a girl who freed slaves, who wept for the children killed by the Harpies, who loses sleep trying to be just in a world that punishes justice." Barristan set the sword aside. "Will she fail? Perhaps. Will she make mistakes? She already has. But at least when I stand before the Seven in judgment, or whatever gods await old men who have served badly, I can say that at the end, I chose to serve someone who tried, someone who cared. That has to count for something." Duran was quiet for a long moment. Then, "In the pits, we had a saying. The masters give you a sword and tell you to fight, but you decide whether to fight for them or against them. I never understood it until I was freed. We always have choices, even when we tell ourselves we do not." "Wise words for a boy who cannot yet grow a proper beard," Barristan said, but his tone was gentle. "Yes, we always have choices. I spent too long pretending I did not." The flux continued its rampage through the lower districts. Each day brought new cases, new deaths. The Grace women worked until they collapsed, then rose and worked again. The Unsullied hauled corpses to the burning pits outside the city walls, where the bodies were consumed by flames that could be seen from the pyramids. Queen Daenerys visited the plague districts twice, against all counsel. Barristan accompanied her, along with Grey Worm and a dozen unsullied. She walked among the dying, touched the foreheads of those burning with fever, whispered words of comfort that probably meant nothing but were given anyway. Doran watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. She was so young, this queen, so small. Yet she did not flinch from the horror, did not turn away from suffering she could not prevent. After the second visit, as they returned to the pyramid, Daenerys pulled Barristan aside. Doran stood at a respectful distance, but could hear their voices in the quiet corridor. "Hisdar Zolorak has sent another message," the queen said, her voice tired. "He says the flux proves that I cannot maintain order in the city, that the gods are punishing Meereen for abandoning the old ways. He offers his terms again: marriage, peace, the reopening of the pits." "And what do you say to this, Your Grace?" "I say he is using the suffering of my people to pressure me into a decision I do not wish to make." Daenerys' voice hardened. "But I also say that people are dying, Ser Barristan. Not just from the harpies now, but from disease. My granaries are half burned. My freedmen are terrified, and I am one girl trying to hold together a city that is falling apart." "You are a queen," Barristan said gently. "A queen who has already accomplished what most rulers wouldn't dare attempt. You freed these people. That alone is more than most monarchs achieve in a lifetime." "But it is not enough, is it?" Daenerys looked up at him, and Doran saw tears on her face. "Freedom means nothing if they die of plague and assassination. What good is a broken chain if you starve to death afterward?" Barristan had no answer. Doran could see the old knight struggling, wanting to offer wisdom or comfort or some clear path forward. But there was no clear path. There never had been. "Your Grace," Barristan said finally, "whatever you decide, I will support you. But I beg you to remember, compromise with evil is still evil. Hisdar offers peace at a price. Make certain you can live with paying it." Daenerys nodded slowly. "I will remember, Ser Barristan. Thank you." She walked away, her small form seeming to carry the weight of the entire pyramid on its shoulders. Barristan watched her go, and Doran saw something in the old knight's expression that frightened him. Resignation. The look of a man who had seen this story before, and knew how it ended. That night, Doran could not sleep. He rose from his pallet in the servants' quarters and walked through the pyramid's corridors, past unsullied guards who nodded as he passed. He was recognized now. Ser Barristan's squire, the boy who had lost his family to the harpies. Some of the soldiers had even begun teaching him the rudiments of spearwork, though he was clumsy compared to their precision. He found himself outside Ser Barristan's chamber. Light showed beneath the door. The knight was awake too, it seemed. Doran knocked softly. "Enter," came the response. Inside, Ser Barristan sat at his table, the white book open before him. Not the real white book, that was in King's Landing, in the White Sword Tower, but a copy he'd made, recording his own deeds in his own hand. Doran had seen him working on it before, writing in the careful script of a man who wanted his truth preserved. "Cannot sleep, boy?" the knight asked without looking up. "No, sir. I keep thinking about the Queen, about what she will decide." "So do I." Barristan dipped his quill in ink, added another line to the page. "So does everyone who serves her, I imagine. Will she marry Hisdar?" "I do not know." "But you fear she will." Barristan set down his quill and looked at Doran. "I fear she will do what I did, for so many years, tell herself that compromise is wisdom, that sacrifice is duty, that giving pieces of herself away will somehow make things better. But it never does. Each piece you give away makes you smaller, weaker, until one day you look in the mirror and do not recognize the person looking back. You speak from experience. I speak from a lifetime of wrong choices, boy, and from a desperate hope that she will not repeat them. Duran moved closer to the table, looked down at the page Barristan had been writing. The script was neat, precise, but the words were stark. In the 300th year after Aegon's conquest, in the city of Meereen, I served Queen Daenerys Targaryen during the plague, called the Pale Mare. I watched her walk among the dying, while her advisers urged her to seal herself away. I watched her weep for people who would never know her tears. I watched her consider compromising everything she believed to buy a peace that would not last. And I prayed, though I am not a pious man, that she would find the strength I never had. You write as if it is already over, Duran said quietly. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it was over the moment she took this city, and we have all just been playing out the ending. Barristan closed the book. But until the ending comes, we do what we can. We serve, we fight, we hope. Is hope enough? It has to be, boy, because without it, we are just old men and young fools standing watch over a dying dream. Duran wanted to protest, to insist that the Queen would prevail, that justice would triumph, that the suffering would end. But he had been a slave too long to believe in easy victories. He knew that most stories ended in pain and loss, that the wheel ground on, regardless of who tried to stop it. Ser Barristan, he said, if she does marry Hisdar, if she compromises, will you still serve her? The night was quiet for a long time. Outside, the night bells rang, marking the hour. Yes, Barristan said finally, because even if she compromises, even if she fails, she is still trying to be good in a world that punishes goodness. And that deserves loyalty, even from an old fool who has wasted too many years giving his loyalty to those who did not deserve it. He stood, wincing slightly as his knee protested. Go to sleep, Duran. Tomorrow will bring fresh horrors, and we will need our strength to face them. Duran bowed and left the chamber. As he walked back to his quarters, he thought about what the knight had said, about compromise and sacrifice, and the slow erosion of self. He thought about his mother, who had worn her dragon pin with pride and died for it. He thought about Queen Daenerys, who was probably lying awake in her chambers right now, wrestling with choices that should never have to be made. And he thought about Ser Barristan Selmy, who had served kings and queens for 40 years and was still trying, at 63, to finally get it right. In the streets below, the Pale Mare rode on, hungry and patient, claiming lives with every breath. And in the shadows, the sons of the Harpy sharpened their knives and waited for the Queen's resolve to break. The announcement came on a morning when the Pale Mare had finally begun to loosen its grip on Meereen's throat. Queen Daenerys Targaryen would wed Hisdar zo Loraq. The fighting pits would reopen. Peace would be restored to the city. Duran heard the proclamation read in the plaza outside the Great Pyramid, the herald's voice echoing off the coloured brick, while a crowd of freedmen and former slaves listened in silence. No cheers greeted the news, no celebration. Only a heavy, oppressive quiet that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. He found Ser Barristan in the training yard, working through sword forms with the methodical precision of a man who had practiced the same movements for 40 years. The knight's blade traced patterns in the air: high guard, low sweep, thrust, parry, each motion economical and perfect despite his age. "You have heard," Durand said. It was not a question. Ser Barristan completed his form before responding, returning to a guard position before lowering his blade. Sweat sheened his face despite the morning cool. "I have heard. And the Queen has made her choice." The knight's voice was carefully neutral, but Durand heard the disappointment beneath the words. "We will serve as we have always served, even though you counseled against it, especially because I counseled against it." Barristan sheathed his sword with a decisive motion. "She listened to my words and disagreed with my conclusion. That is her right as queen. My duty is not to agree with her choices, boy. My duty is to protect her while she makes them, and to stand beside her when they prove right or wrong." Durand wanted to argue, wanted to say that this was different, that compromise with the great masters was betrayal of everything the Queen claimed to believe. But he saw the set of Ser Barristan's jaw, the rigid control in his posture, and understood. The old knight was disappointed, perhaps even angry, but he would not voice it. Not now, not when the Queen needed support rather than reproach. "When is the wedding?" Durand asked instead. 3 days hence, and the great games reopen the following week." Barristan's lip curled slightly. "Men will die for entertainment again. The great masters will have their blood sport returned to them, and they will call it tradition and honor and justice. The Queen said they would fight as free men, that no slaves would die in the pits. Free men die just as thoroughly as slaves, boy. The only difference is they choose their death rather than having it chosen for them. I am not certain that is much comfort when the sand drinks their blood." The wedding was a Giscari affair, elaborate and strange to Durand's eyes. Queen Daenerys wore a toga of white and gold, the heavy garment wrapped around her small frame in the complex folds that marked high status. Her silver-gold hair was oiled and perfumed in the Myrinese style. She looked like a doll dressed by others, a girl playing at being someone she was not. Hizdar Zolorak stood beside her in purple and crimson, his face bearing the smug satisfaction of a man who had won a game. Others did not know they were playing. He was handsome enough, Durand supposed, tall and elegant, with the refined features of old Giscari blood. But his eyes were cold when they thought no one was watching, and his smile never reached above his mouth. The ceremony took place in the Temple of the Graces, with the High Grace presiding. Durand stood with the other servants and guards at the back of the temple, watching as his queen was bound to a man she did not love for the sake of a peace that would not last. Ser Barristan stood closer to the front, in his place of honor as the queen's protector. He wore his finest armor, polished to a mirror sheen, his white cloak draped over his shoulders despite no longer being Kingsguard. He looked like a statue, carved from stone and regret. When the High Grace pronounced them wed, when Hizdar kissed Daenerys' lips with proprietary triumph, Durand saw the knight's hands clench into fists. But Ser Barristan's face remained impassive, showing nothing to the crowd of great masters and freedmen who had gathered to witness the union. After the ceremony, there was a feast. Durand served at Ser Barristan's table, pouring wine and bringing food the knight barely touched. The great masters were jubilant, laughing and drinking, already celebrating their victory. The freedmen in attendance were subdued, watching their queen sit beside her new husband with the wary caution of people who had learned to expect betrayal. "She looks miserable," Duran whispered as he refilled the knight's cup. "She is doing her duty as she sees it," Barristan replied quietly. "As am I. As are you. We do not have to enjoy our duties to fulfill them." "Is that what you told yourself when you served the mad king?" The words were out before Duran could stop them. He froze, expecting anger, expecting to be dismissed from service for his impertinence. But Ser Barristan only looked at him with those blue eyes that had seen too much, and said softly, "Every day, boy, every single day." The Great Games opened a week later, with fanfare that seemed designed to drown out any lingering doubts. The fighting pits of Meereen, Daznak's pit, the largest, had been closed since Daenerys took the city. Now they were reopened, cleaned and repaired, the sand raked smooth and fresh, the benches filled with spectators eager for blood. The great masters attended in their tokars of coloured silk. The freedmen came too, some curious, others angry, all drawn by the spectacle. Queen Daenerys sat in the place of honour, her purple toga wrapped around her, with King Hisdar, King, Duran thought with disgust, at her side. Ser Barristan stood behind them, fully armoured, his hand resting on his sword hilt. Grey Worm and a dozen Unsullied formed a protective ring around the royal box. Duran stood with the other servants, close enough to see the queen's face, but far enough to be beneath notice. He watched her, watching the preparations, and he saw the distaste she tried to hide. She did not want to be here, but she had made her bargain, and the price was her presence while men killed each other for entertainment. The first fights were unremarkable, sellswords and pit fighters displaying their skills against each other or against animals. The crowd roared with approval as blood stained the sand. Hisdar leaned over to Daenerys frequently, pointing out techniques or famous fighters, playing the role of educator. She nodded, but did not smile. Ser Barristan's expression was carved from granite. Duran had seen the knight in many moods over the past weeks, disappointed, angry, weary, determined. But this was different. This was contempt, barely contained, simmering beneath rigid discipline. "You fought in tourneys," Duran said quietly, moving close under the pretense of adjusting something at the knight's station. "Is this so different?" "Tourneys are controlled combat between armoured knights following rules of honour," Barristan replied, his voice barely audible over the crowd's noise. "This is slaughter dressed as sport, men dying for the amusement of others. Yes, boy, it is different. But people die in tourneys too. Rarely, and by accident, not design. These pits..." The knight gestured at the arena below, where a fighter had just gutted his opponent to the crowd's delight. "These exist solely to provide death as entertainment. It is barbarism, and I am ashamed to stand here bearing witness to it." "Then why do you?" "Because she is down there." Barristan nodded toward Daenerys. "And while she sits in that seat, exposed to thousands of people who may include those who wish her dead, I will stand at her back. That is what I do. That is all I can do." The afternoon wore on. Fight followed fight, men against men against beasts, mass melees, where half a dozen fighters entered and one emerged victorious. The sand grew dark with blood. The crowd grew louder, more frenzied, drunk on violence and wine. Duran watched Queen Daenerys grow paler with each death. She flinched when a young fighter, barely older than Duran himself, had his throat opened by a veteran's blade. She looked away when lions were released to tear apart condemned criminals. Hisdar noticed none of this, or pretended not to, his attention fixed on the spectacle he had worked so hard to restore. Then, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, something changed. The crowd's roar shifted in pitch from bloodlust to something else. Surprise, perhaps, or fear. Duran looked to the sky and saw it, a dark shape circling high above the pit, massive wings catching the light. Drogon. The black dragon descended like a thunderbolt, a predator that dwarfed the lions and bears that had entertained the crowd moments before. He was enormous, larger than when Daenerys had last controlled him months ago, his scales gleaming like midnight, his eyes like molten gold. The fighting pit erupted into chaos. Spectators screamed and fled, trampling each other in their panic. The fighters in the arena dropped their weapons and ran. Hisdar stood, frozen, his face white with terror. The Unsullied closed ranks around the royal box, spears raised uselessly against a creature that could bathe them all in fire. Only Daenerys did not flee. Duran watched, transfixed, as his queen stood from her seat and walked toward the edge of the box. Ser Barristan moved to intercept her, one hand reaching for her arm, but she shook him off with surprising strength. "Your Grace." "No," the knight began. "He is mine," Daenerys said, and her voice held something Duran had not heard in weeks, certainty. "He is my son." Drogon landed in the center of the arena with an impact that shook the ground. He was feeding on the corpse of a fallen fighter, tearing flesh with teeth designed to rend cattle. Blood stained his jaws. His tail lashed, smashing the wooden barriers that separated the sand from the stands. And Daenerys climbed down from the royal box. "Your Grace!" Ser Barristan's shout was drowned by the dragon's roar. The knight tried to follow, but Grey Worm caught his arm. "She has chosen," the Unsullied commander said in his flat voice. "We cannot follow where she goes." Duran could see Ser Barristan struggling, duty warring with wisdom, the oath to protect warring with the knowledge that some things could not be protected against. The old knight's face was anguished, torn between charging after his queen and acknowledging the futility of such action. In the arena, Daenerys approached her dragon. The creature raised its head from its meal, blood dripping from its jaws, and watched her come. Duran expected it to attack, to burn her where she stood. Instead, it lowered its head and made a sound. Not quite a roar, more like a rumble deep in its chest. The queen reached out and touched the dragon's snout. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Daenerys began to climb, hauling herself up the dragon's foreleg, finding purchase on the ridges of its scales. Drogon shifted, accommodating her weight, and when she settled between his wings, when she gripped the horns at the base of his skull, the dragon's roar shook the very stones of the city. "She is leaving," Duran whispered. "She is leaving us." "Yes," Ser Barristan said, and his voice held wonder and grief in equal measure. Drogon launched himself into the air with powerful beats of his wings. Sand and debris scattered, forcing spectators to shield their faces. The dragon climbed higher, carrying the queen on his back, and for a moment they were silhouetted against the setting sun. Girl and dragon, legend made real. Then they turned north and flew, becoming smaller, becoming a speck, becoming nothing against the vast sky. The fighting pit fell into stunned silence. Duran looked at Ser Barristan and saw something on the old knight's face he had never seen before. A smile, small and sad, but genuine. "Why do you smile?" Duran asked. "She is gone. The queen is gone. Because she escaped, Barristan said quietly. For a moment, she was free of this place, these compromises, these impossible choices. She chose the sky over the pit, the dragon over the crown. His smile faded. But she will come back, or she will not. Either way, we have work to do. The chaos was building now. Hisdar was shouting orders that no one heeded. The great masters were fleeing. The freedmen were confused, uncertain whether to celebrate or mourn. And in the centre of it all, Ser Barristan Selmy stood like a rock in a storm. "Grey worm," the knight said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Take your Unsullied and secure the pyramid. No one enters or leaves without my command. Duran, go to the Seneschal's chambers and find Resnak Mo Resnak. Bring him to me, now." "What are you going to do?" Duran asked. What should have been done when the queen made her compromise? Barristan's hand moved to his sword hilt. "I am going to take command of this city before it tears itself apart." By nightfall, the Great Pyramid was sealed. Ser Barristan had moved with the decisive efficiency of a man who had commanded in wars before Duran was born. The Unsullied responded to his orders as they had to the Queen's, instantly, without question. Grey Worm had declared that until the Queen returned, Ser Barristan Selmy spoke with her voice. Hisdar zo Lorak had protested, of course. He was the king consort, he insisted. He should rule in his wife's absence. But his protests died when Ser Barristan had him seized by 4 Unsullied and dragged to a cell deep in the pyramid. "You are the king of nothing," Barristan had told him, his voice cold as winter. "Your marriage bought you a crown, but the queen is gone and the crown with her. Until she returns, if she returns, this city is under martial law, and I am the law." Duran had watched Hisdar's face turn from outrage to fear to calculation. The man was already planning, already scheming how to turn this to his advantage. But for now, he was led away in chains, and the old knight ruled Meereen. Later, in the council chamber, Ser Barristan met with Grey Worm, Skahaz Mo Kandak, and Resnak Mo Resnak. Duran stood near the door, officially serving wine, actually listening to every word. "The Sons of the Harpy will see this as their moment," Skahaz said, his bald head gleaming in the lamplight. "The queen is gone, the king imprisoned. They will strike tonight, tomorrow, soon. We must strike first." "Agreed," Barristan said. "Grey Worm, double the patrols. Seal the pyramids of the great masters who have been most vocal in their opposition. Take them as hostages." "Your Radiant suggested such action before," Resnak said nervously. She was persuaded it was too provocative. "Her Radiance is not here," Barristan interrupted. "I am, and I will not sit idle while murderers sharpen their knives. The time for compromise has ended, Resnak. Now we see if the Queen's mercy brought us peace or merely delayed war." "And if the Queen returns and disapproves of your actions?" the Seneschal asked. Ser Barristan smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Then she may dismiss me from service, as Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister did before her. I have been dismissed before. I will survive it again. But I will not survive watching this city fall to murderers while I stand aside doing nothing." He turned to Skahaz. "Take 12 of the great master's sons and daughters. Hold them in comfortable confinement. For every freedman or unsullied killed by the Harpies from this moment forward, we will execute 1 hostage. Make certain the great masters understand this. Their children's lives now depend on their good behavior." "At last, Sense," Skahaz said with satisfaction. "At last we treat them as they deserve. We treat them as war demands, Barristan corrected. "I take no pleasure in threatening children. But if threatening children saves lives, then I will bear that sin. It will not be the first I carry, nor the worst." After the others departed, Duran approached the knight. Ser Barristan stood at the window, looking out over the darkened city, his shoulders bearing the weight of command. "You have changed," Duran said, "since the Queen left. You are different." "I am free," Barristan said simply. "For 40 years I have served, always constrained by oaths and protocols, and the need to defer to those I served. Now, for however long it lasts, I do not serve a king or queen. I serve an ideal, protecting this city until its rightful ruler returns, and I will do whatever is necessary to fulfill that purpose, regardless of whether it would please her. What if she does not return? Then I will hold this city until I die, or until someone stronger takes it from me." The knight turned to face Duran. "You should sleep, boy. Tomorrow we begin preparing for war. The sons of the Harpy will not wait long to test our resolve." "Are you not afraid? Of what might happen? Of making the wrong choice?" "Terrified," Ser Barristan admitted. "But I have been afraid before, and fear did not excuse inaction then any more than it does now. We do what we must, and we live with the consequences, and we hope that when the songs are sung, they remember we tried." Duran bowed and left the chamber. As he walked the corridors back to his quarters, he passed unsullied soldiers standing watch with new intensity, freedmen's servants whispering about the dragon and the Queen's disappearance, and the general air of a city holding its breath before battle. Somewhere in the darkness, the sons of the Harpy were sharpening their blades. Somewhere outside the city walls, armies gathered, Yunkai's slavers preparing for siege, sellsword companies making camp, the enemies of the new order sensing weakness. And somewhere in the sky, a girl rode a dragon toward an unknown destination, free for the first time in months from the weight of crown and compromise. In his chamber, Ser Barristan Selmy removed his armor piece by piece, set it carefully aside, and knelt before the window to pray to gods he was not certain existed. He prayed for the Queen's safe return. He prayed for the strength to hold the city in her absence. And he prayed that when the ending came, for himself, for Daenerys, for Meereen, it would be an ending worth the price they had all paid. Outside, the city bells tolled midnight, and in the pyramid's depths, Hisdar Zolorak plotted in his cell, and the wheel of history turned toward its next inevitable revolution. The hostages were taken before dawn. Duran watched from the courtyard of the Great Pyramid as unsullied soldiers led 12 young Giscari into the fortress, sons and daughters of the great masters, ranging in age from 10 to 20. They came wrapped in fine tokars, their heads held high despite their fear, trained from birth never to show weakness before inferiors. But their eyes betrayed them. Duran saw the terror there, the dawning realization that the world they had known, where their blood and lineage protected them from consequence, had ended the moment a dragon carried their queen into the sky. Ser Barristan stood at the pyramid's entrance, watching the procession with a face carved from stone. He had not slept, Duran knew. The old knight had spent the night organizing patrols, issuing orders, transforming Meereen from a city attempting peace into a city preparing for war. Ser Barristan, one of the hostages called out. A young man, perhaps 18, with the copper and blue toga of House Jacques. My father will have your head for this. The great masters won't stand for such insult to our houses. The knight descended the steps slowly, his armor gleaming in the pre-dawn light. He stopped before the young man and studied him with eyes that had seen more battles than this boy had seen summers. "Your father," Barristan said quietly, "will do nothing, because if he does, you will die. That is the new order of things. The Queen tried mercy and compromise. That path led to murder in the streets and poison in the wells. Now we try something different. This is not justice." "No," Barristan agreed. "It is hostage-taking. It is the brutal calculus of war, and I am not proud of it. But I will keep you alive and comfortable as long as your families keep the peace. The choice, young master, is theirs to make." He turned to Grey Worm, who stood nearby with his bronze cap gleaming. "See them housed in the east wing. Separate chambers, comfortable furnishings, adequate food. They are to be treated with respect, but kept under constant guard. Any escape attempt will be met with immediate execution." "It will be done," Grey Worm said, and led the hostages away. Duran approached Ser Barristan as the last of the prisoners disappeared into the pyramid's depths. "You seem different," the boy ventured, "since you took command. More certain." "I am doing what should have been done from the beginning," the knight replied. He began walking toward the training yard, and Duran fell into step beside him. "The Queen tried to win their hearts, but you cannot win the hearts of people who see you as property to be owned or an obstacle to be removed. You can only make them fear the consequences of acting against you." That sounds like something the great masters would say. Barristan stopped walking and looked at Duran with an intensity that made the boy step back. "Yes, it does. And that is the tragedy of rule, boy. Sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become a little monstrous yourself. The difference, the only difference that matters, is what you do with the power once you have it." He resumed walking, and Duran followed, processing the knight's words. In the training yard, a dozen unsullied soldiers were drilling under the morning sun. Ser Barristan watched them for a moment, then called out, "Grey Worm, these men are fighting as unsullied. Tight formation, short thrusts, shield wall tactics. But we are not fighting a pitched battle. We are fighting shadows and knives. We need different tactics." Grey Worm approached, his scarred face curious. What would Ser Barristan suggest? "In Westeros, we have knights errant, swordsmen who fight individually or in small groups, not as a formation. Your Unsullied are disciplined, but that discipline makes them predictable. The Harpies know how you move, how you patrol. We need to make you unpredictable." For the next hour, Duran watched as Ser Barristan Selmy, 63 years old, a knight from a different continent with a different style of warfare, taught the Unsullied new techniques, small unit tactics, how to fight in confined spaces, how to break formation when necessary, how to hunt rather than simply defend. The soldiers struggled at first. They had been trained since childhood in one way of fighting, and unlearning that training was like asking a man to breathe with different lungs. But they were disciplined, and they adapted, and by midday they were moving through the training yard in pairs and trios, learning to flow like water rather than stand like stone. "You are a good teacher," Duran said during a break, offering the knight water from a skin. Barristan drank deeply, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I have had many years to learn what works in war. The Unsullied are superb soldiers, but they were trained to fight in armies, in set battles. The Sons of the Harpy are not an army. They are assassins and terrorists. We must become the same, disciplined assassins, hunting them in their own warrens." And if the queen returns and disapproves, then she may find another commander. Barristan's voice was firm. But she left this city in chaos, boy. She made her choice to ride the dragon. Now I make mine to hold what she left behind. If that requires me to be harsher than she would prefer, so be it. I will carry that weight. The first test came 3 days later. A group of masked men, 5 of them, wearing the harpy symbols, struck at an unsullied patrol in the lower districts. But this time, the patrol was not 3 men walking in formation. It was 2 soldiers moving through shadows, with 4 more watching from rooftops and alleyways, a trap waiting to be sprung. When the harpies attacked, the hunters became the hunted. Duran heard about it from one of the Unsullied who had participated, a soldier named Stalwart Shield, who spoke broken common tongue with pride. "We let them kill first soldier," Stalwart Shield explained in the mess hall that evening. "Let them think they succeed. Then we come from above, from sides. They try to run. We kill 3. 2 we capture alive." "Alive?" Duran asked. "Ser Barristan says we need to know who leads them, who gives orders. We cannot kill shadows if we do not know where shadows sleep." The 2 captured harpies were brought to the pyramid's dungeons. Ser Barristan questioned them personally, with Skahaz Mokandak present, and Duran standing near the door, officially there to serve wine, actually there to witness what happened when an honourable knight did dishonourable work. The first prisoner spat curses in Giscari and refused to speak. Skahaz beat him with casual efficiency, methodical strikes designed to cause pain without causing death. Ser Barristan watched without expression, his blue eyes cold as winter ice. "Enough," the knight said finally. Skahaz stepped back, breathing hard, and Barristan approached the bleeding prisoner. "You are a fool. You die for masters who would not spare you a second glance if you were the one being questioned. Tell me who leads the Sons of the Harpy, and your death will be quick. Refuse, and I will give you back to the shave pate." The prisoner laughed through broken teeth. "You are soft, old man. The queen made you soft. You speak of quick death like it is mercy. We know what mercy looks like. It looks like weakness. It looks like your queen flying away on her monster, abandoning the city she claimed to love." Barristan's face did not change, but Duran saw his hand clench into a fist. "Take him back to his cell," the knight said. "Let him think on his choices. Bring me the other one." The second prisoner was younger, barely more than a boy, perhaps 16. He trembled as he was brought in, his eyes wide with fear. Duran recognized the look. It was the same look he had worn himself once, when the masters decided his fate. "What is your name?" Ser Barristan asked, his voice gentler now. I am called Kraz, sir." The boy's common tongue was surprisingly good. "Kraz, that is a pit fighter's name. Were you a fighter?" "My father was. He died in the pits before the queen closed them. I took his name to honour him. And now you honour him by murdering freedmen in the streets?" The boy flinched. "The great masters said. They said the queen took away our traditions, that we must fight, to restore them. They said we were heroes, that the gods would." "The gods care nothing for your murders," Barristan interrupted. "You killed to restore slavery, to put chains back on people who had just learned to stand upright. There is no honour in that, boy, no matter what lies you were told." Tears streaked Kraz's face. "I did not want to, but my mother. They have my mother. They said if I did not fight for them, she would be sold across the narrow sea, taken somewhere I could never find her." Ser Barristan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, some of the coldness had thawed. "Who has your mother? Which great master?" "Reznak Moreznak's cousin, Grazdan Moresnak. He is one of the leaders. He organizes the sons, gives them targets, keeps the names hidden, so no one can betray the others." Skahaz leaned forward, his brutal face eager. "We should take this Grazdan, interrogate him, make him tell us all the names." "We should," Barristan agreed, "but not yet. First, we verify the boy's story. Grey Worm, send soldiers to find this woman, Kraz's mother. If she exists, if she's being held as leverage, free her. Bring her here." "And the boy?" Skahaz asked. "Keep him comfortable. If his information proves true, he may yet earn his life." After the prisoners were removed, Duran approached the knight. "You believed him, the second one. You believed his story about his mother." "I believe many men do terrible things for understandable reasons," Barristan said, suddenly sounding exhausted. "That does not excuse the terrible things, but it explains them. And understanding your enemy is the first step to defeating him. What will you do about Grazdan Moresnak? Watch him, follow him, learn who he speaks to, who visits him, where the sons gather." The knight rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of weariness Duran had never seen him make before. "We are fighting in the dark, boy. Every piece of information is a candle lit against that darkness. We need many candles before we strike." Over the following weeks, Ser Barristan transformed Meereen. The city that had been paralyzed by indecision under Daenerys' rule became a city under martial order. Patrols moved through every district, unpredictable in their routes and timing. The great masters found their movements restricted, their meetings monitored. Those suspected of supporting the Sons of the Harpy were arrested and questioned, and the hostages remained in their comfortable cells, a constant reminder that the old knight would do what the young queen had not: make the great masters pay for resistance with the lives of their children. The killings slowed, then stopped. The Sons of the Harpy had not been defeated. Duran knew that. Everyone knew that. But they had been made to hesitate, to doubt, to fear consequence. Duran watched Ser Barristan during this time and saw the toll it took. The night still rose before dawn, still trained with the Unsullied, still walked the streets, checking patrols and speaking with freedmen. But he looked older somehow, as if each decision, each harsh order, aged him a year. One evening, Duran found him in his chamber, staring at the white book copy he kept. "What are you writing?" the boy asked. "The truth," Barristan said, "that in the year 300 AC, in the city of Meereen, Ser Barristan Selmy took hostages, threatened children, ordered interrogations that approached torture, became the kind of man he once swore to stand against. You did what was necessary. Do not comfort me with that lie," the knight said sharply. "Necessary is the word cowards use to justify actions they are ashamed of. I did what I thought would save lives. Whether it was necessary, whether it was right, history will judge. But I will not hide from what I have done." He dipped his quill in ink and continued writing. Duran read over his shoulder. "I held the city through fear rather than love, through threats rather than justice. I became the hand that holds the sword rather than the shield that protects. The queen tried to break the wheel. I merely turned it in a different direction. May the Seven forgive me, for I cannot forgive myself." "Ser Barristan," Duran said quietly, "you saved the city. The killings stopped. The people are safer. For now. But fear only lasts as long as the threat that causes it. The moment I show weakness, the moment the hostages are released, the sons will return. Fear does not change hearts, boy. It only forces hands, and forced hands eventually find a way to strike back. Before Doran could respond, a commotion echoed from the corridor outside, voices shouting, boots running. Grey Worm appeared at the door, his face grim. Ser Barristan, the scouts have returned from the walls. You must see this. They climbed to the pyramid's highest point, where a platform offered views of the surrounding lands. What Doran saw made his blood turn cold. Armies, vast armies stretched across the landscape beyond Meereen's walls. Siege equipment, trebuchets, rams, towers, supply trains that stretched to the horizon. Banners flying the symbols of Yunkai, of the other slave cities, of sellsword companies famous and feared. How many? Ser Barristan asked, his voice steady, despite the impossible odds before them. 40,000, perhaps more, Grey Worm replied. They will have us surrounded within 3 days. The siege will begin shortly after. Doran felt panic rising in his chest. They had perhaps 8,000 defenders, unsullied, freedmen who had taken up arms, whatever forces remained loyal, against 40,000 veterans and siege weapons that could reduce the pyramid to rubble. But Ser Barristan was smiling. "Why do you smile?" Doran demanded. "We are doomed. We cannot hold against such numbers." "Perhaps not," the knight agreed. "But at least now the enemy shows his face. No more shadows and knives, no more sons hiding behind masks. This is honest war, boy, the kind where men face each other, and the brave win or die trying." He turned to Grey Worm. "How long can we hold?" "If we ration strictly, 3 months, perhaps 4. Then we starve. Then we have 3 months to bloody their noses so thoroughly they lose their taste for siege. 3 months to show them that taking Meereen will cost more than they are willing to pay." Barristan's smile widened, and it was not kind. "I have fought in sieges before. I know how to make attackers regret their choices." Over the following days, Doran watched Ser Barristan prepare for war with the energy of a man half his age. The knight organized the defense, positioned troops, oversaw the storage of food and water, planned sorties that would harass the besiegers and destroy their equipment. And through it all, he trained Doran in the ways of combat. "You are my squire," Barristan said one evening in the training yard, pressing a practice sword into Doran's hands. "If I fall in the battle to come, you must be able to defend yourself. More than that, you must be able to carry on what we have started here." "I am not a knight, sir. I am just a freedman, a former slave." "You are a man who has chosen to stand against tyranny," Barristan interrupted. "That is all a knight truly is, regardless of birth or training. Now, guard position. Let me see what you have learned from watching the Unsullied." They sparred as the sun set, the old knight correcting Doran's form, teaching him to read an opponent's movements, to anticipate rather than react. It was exhausting work, and Doran's arms burned with effort, but he pushed through the pain. Finally, Barristan called a halt. "Enough for today. You learn quickly, boy. Another few months and you might actually be dangerous." "We do not have months," Doran said, breathing hard. "The siege will come when it comes. Until then, we prepare." The knight wiped sweat from his face with a cloth. "Doran, there is something I must tell you, in case I do not survive what is coming. Do not speak of death. Be silent and listen." Barristan's voice was firm, but not unkind. "If I fall, if the city falls, You must find a way to escape. Flee north, find the queen if you can, or find passage across the narrow sea to Westeros. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that Meereen held, that the freedmen fought, that we did not surrender without making them pay. I will not leave you. You will if I command it. Promise me, Doran." The boy met the knight's eyes and saw something there that made him understand. This was not a suggestion. This was a final order from a commander who knew the odds, who understood how this story would likely end. "I promise," Doran whispered. "Good." Ser Barristan clapped him on the shoulder. "Now come, we have work to do. The siege begins tomorrow, and I intend to give them a welcome they will remember for generations." That night, Doran lay on his pallet and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Somewhere beyond the walls, 40,000 men prepared to attack. Somewhere in the pyramid's depths, hostages waited in their cells. Somewhere in the city, the sons of the Harpy plotted their return to power. And in his chamber, Ser Barristan Selmy, 63 years old, dismissed by kings, serving a missing queen, wrote in his book and prepared for one last battle. The old knight had spent his life serving others. Now, for the first time, he served by choice rather than oath. And if that service required him to become something he had always stood against, a man who held children hostage, who ruled through fear, who made hard choices without flinching, then he would carry that burden. Because at the end, Doran understood. Ser Barristan was no longer trying to be Barristan the Bold. He was trying to be Barristan the Sufficient. And for a city surrounded by enemies, for freedmen who had nowhere else to turn, for a queen who had fled on dragon's wings, perhaps that would be enough. Dawn would bring war. But tonight, in the great pyramid of Meereen, a knight who had served badly for 40 years finally served well. And the wheel turned, inevitable as tide, toward whatever ending the gods had written. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky empty of clouds and full of promise. Ser Barristan Selmy stood in his chamber, donning his armour for what he knew might be the final time. Not the ornate plate of a Kingsguard, polished to mirror brightness and marked with royal symbols. Not even the functional steel he had worn while serving Daenerys. This was simpler gear, a soldier's armour, practical and unadorned, the kind worn by knights errant who served no lord but their own conscience. His hands moved through the familiar ritual without thought. Gambeson first, then mail, then plate, each buckle fastened, each strap tightened with the precision of 47 years' practice. His fingers did not tremble. His breath came steady and deep. He was not afraid. That realization surprised him. He had spent so much of his life afraid of failing his kings, afraid of making wrong choices, afraid of becoming what he despised. But this morning, with a sortie planned that would likely kill him, with odds so overwhelming that victory was measured only in how many enemies died alongside you, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Peace. "Ser Barristan?" Doran's voice came from the doorway. The boy entered carrying the knight's sword, freshly oiled and sharpened. "The Unsullied are assembled. Grey Worm says they await your command." Barristan took the blade and belted it at his waist. The weight was familiar, comforting, an old friend who had never betrayed him. How many? 300 mounted, another 200 on foot, the best fighters we have. Doran hesitated. "It is not enough, is it? Against their numbers?" "Numbers only matter when both sides want to live," Barristan said, checking the sword's draw. smooth. Good. We are not trying to win, boy. We are trying to make them remember that taking this city has a price. He crossed to the window and looked out at Meereen one final time. The sun was rising over the coloured pyramids, red and purple and green and gold, painting them in shades of fire. Below, in the streets, freedmen went about their morning routines with the false normalcy of people pretending the siege camps beyond the walls did not exist. Somewhere out there, Daenerys Targaryen flew on dragon's wings. Or she was dead. Or she was lost. It did not matter anymore. What mattered was holding what she had built long enough for it to mean something, even if that meaning was written in blood and ash. "I want you to stay here," Barristan said, still looking out the window. "When the sortie rides out, you remain in the pyramid with Grey Worm and the reserve forces." "No." Duran's voice was firm. "I am your squire. My place is at your side." "Your place is where I command it to be. You taught me that a knight chooses who to serve. I choose to serve you. I choose to ride with you." Barristan turned from the window and studied the boy. Duran had grown in the months since he had first appeared at the council chamber, grief-stricken and desperate for purpose. The slave who had known only obedience had become a young man who knew how to stand firm in his choices. "You will probably die," Barristan said quietly. "Then I die free, fighting beside the man who taught me what freedom means." Duran met his eyes without flinching. "You cannot deny me this, sir, not after everything." For a long moment the knight said nothing. Then he smiled. Not the sad, worn smile Duran had seen so often, but something genuine and almost proud. "Very well. Fetch your armour. And Duran." "Yes, sir?" "It has been an honour, serving alongside you." The sortie assembled in the plaza, before the Great Pyramid, as the sun climbed higher. 300 mounted soldiers, freedmen who had learned to ride, unsullied cavalry trained in Westerosi tactics, sellswords who had chosen Daenerys' coin over Yunkai's. They sat their horses in formation, spears and swords gleaming, bronze caps and leather armour bearing the scars of previous battles. 200-foot soldiers formed up behind them, carrying shields and short spears, ready to exploit whatever chaos the cavalry created. Ser Barristan rode to the head of the formation on a destrier, not the massive war horses of Westeros, but a capable mount nonetheless. He wore his helm now, the visor raised, his white hair visible beneath the steel. Duran rode beside him on a smaller horse, his borrowed armour fitting poorly, but his grip on his spear steady. Grey Worm approached on foot, his face impassive as always. "The gates are ready to open. The enemy camps are 3 miles distant. Their sentries have been watching our preparations. They will be ready for us." "Good," Barristan said. "Let them be ready. Let them see us coming and understand what it means to face people fighting for their freedom, rather than for coin or glory." He stood in his stirrups and raised his voice so the entire formation could hear. The plaza fell silent. "Soldiers of Meereen," Barristan called out, "today we ride against an army that outnumbers us 10 to 1. They have siege weapons and supplies and veteran soldiers. They have every advantage except one. They do not have what we have. They do not fight for home. They do not fight for freedom. They fight for gold and power and the right to put chains back on people who have finally learned to stand upright." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I am an old man. I have fought in more battles than most of you have seen summers. I have served kings and queens, good and bad, for 47 years. And I tell you this, I have never been more honoured to ride into battle than I am today. Because today we do not fight for a crown or a throne or a lord's ambition. We fight for something simple and true, the right of every person to live free or die trying. The soldiers stirred, a ripple of movement through the ranks. Some of you will die today, Barristan continued, his voice carrying across the plaza. Perhaps all of us will. But they will remember this sortie for 100 years. They will tell stories of the day 500 freedmen rode out against 40,000 and made them bleed. They will remember that Meereen did not surrender, that its people chose to stand. He drew his sword, the blade catching the morning sun like captured lightning. "The Queen gave you freedom," he shouted. "Now show them what free men can do, for Meereen, for Daenerys, for freedom!" The roar that answered him shook the coloured bricks of the pyramids. "Freedom! Freedom! Freedom!" Barristan lowered his visor and turned his horse toward the gate. "Open the gates," he commanded. They rode out in a column, the cavalry first, moving at a trot through Meereen streets, while the citizens watched from windows and doorways. Some cheered, some wept, some simply stared, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be remembered or forgotten based entirely on what happened in the next few hours. The gates opened onto the plain beyond, where the siege camp sprawled like a second city built of tents and supply wagons and war machines. Smoke from thousands of cook fires rose into the clear sky. Banners snapped in the wind. The harpy of Yunkai, the symbols of a dozen sellsword companies, the colours of the other slave cities that had come to restore the old order. 40,000 men, perhaps more. Barristan could see them scrambling now, alerted by sentries, forming up into defensive lines. They had expected a sortie eventually. No besieged city stayed passive forever. But they had not expected it this soon. This boldly. "At the trot," Barristan commanded, and the formation picked up pace. They rode across the plain in disciplined formation, the horses' hooves drumming against hard-packed earth. The distance closed. 2 miles, 1 mile, half a mile. The enemy lines solidified, spears bristling outward like the quills of a monstrous hedgehog. Duran rode at Barristan's side, his face pale beneath his helm, but his hands steady on spear and reins. The boy glanced at the knight once, as if seeking reassurance. Barristan met his eyes through the visors and nodded once. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "At the gallop!" the knight roared. "Charge!" The formation surged forward like a breaking wave. Barristan felt the familiar rush of battle, the thunder of hooves, the war cries, the tunnel vision that narrowed the world to what was directly ahead. He had experienced this hundreds of times, in tourneys and battles across 2 continents, and his body knew what to do, even as his mind achieved a strange clarity. Every mistake, every silence, every wrong king. It all led here. The enemy line loomed before them, spears levelled, soldiers bracing for impact. To this moment, this choice, this fight worth having. They hit the line like a hammer striking glass. Chaos. That was what battle truly was. Not the clean narratives of songs, but chaos and blood and screaming, and the desperate scramble to survive one moment so you could face the next. Barristan's sword sang as it had always sung, each stroke perfect, each movement economical. He cut through the spearmen who tried to unhorse him, his blade finding gaps in armour, throats, the soft flesh beneath raised arms. His horse trampled men who fell before him. Around him, the Meereenese cavalry drove deep into the enemy camp. scattering defenders, overturning cookfires, cutting supply lines. He saw Duran fighting to his left, the boy thrusting his spear with more courage than skill, holding his own against experienced soldiers through pure determination. Pride swelled in Barristan's chest. He will make a fine knight if he survives this. They penetrated 100 yards, then 200, carving a path of destruction through the camp. Tents burned, supply wagons overturned. The enemy that had seemed so overwhelming from the walls now dissolved into confusion and panic under the sudden assault. But numbers always told in the end. Barristan felt his horse shudder beneath him as a spear found its chest. The animal screamed and went down, throwing the knight forward. He hit the ground hard, his old bones protesting, but rolled and came up with his sword still in hand. On foot now, surrounded by enemy soldiers who recognized him, the white-haired knight who led the charge, the legend from across the narrow sea. They came at him from all sides. Barristan fought as he had always fought, efficiently, perfectly, each movement honed by decades of practice. His sword was an extension of his arm, his body moving through the forms he had drilled since he was younger than Duran. He killed 3 men in as many heartbeats, cut down a 4th who tried to flank him, parried a blow that would have taken his head. But he was 63 years old, and there were too many. A mace struck his shoulder, denting the armor, numbing his left arm. A sword scraped across his helm, ringing his skull. He stumbled, but stayed upright, his blade still moving, still dangerous. Not yet. Not while there is work to do. Through the press of bodies, he saw trebuchets, the siege weapons that would reduce Meereen to rubble if given time. They stood unguarded, the crews having fled to join the defence. Barristan fought toward them, step by bloody step, his sword clearing a path. Soldiers fell before him. More came, always more. He reached the nearest trebuchet as his breath began to fail, as his old heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted all to escape. With his last strength, he hacked at the ropes and supports, damaging the machine beyond quick repair. A blade pierced his side, sliding between plates of armor. Pain, sharp and immediate, but distant somehow. He had been wounded before. This was just another scar. He turned and killed the man who had wounded him. Then another. Then another. Duran appeared beside him, the boy fighting with desperate courage, his spear bloody, his face spattered with gore. "Ser Barristan, we must retreat. The horn has sounded." Had it? Barristan had not heard. The world had narrowed to sword and enemy, breath and blood. "Go," he told the boy. "Get to the horses. Ride back." "Not without you." "That is an order, squire." Barristan's voice cracked like a whip. "Go, tell them what we did here. Tell them we stood." For a moment, Duran hesitated. Then he turned and fled, running toward where the cavalry was reforming, preparing to withdraw. Barristan turned back to the enemy. They surrounded him now, 12 men, then 20, then more. Sellswards and slavers' soldiers, veteran fighters who recognized that the old knight was trapped. "Barristan the Bold," one of them called out. "Yield, and you will be ransomed. This is not your city, not your war. Yield." Barristan laughed, actually laughed, the sound clear, despite his laboured breathing. "This is exactly my war, and I have never yielded in my life. I will not start now." He raised his sword, stance perfect despite exhaustion, despite pain, despite the certainty of what was coming. Eris burning, Robert dismissing, Joffrey smiling. all the failures, all the silences, all the wrong choices. The enemy soldiers hesitated, impressed despite themselves by the old man's defiance. And then Daenerys, young and flawed, and trying so hard to be just, weeping for the dead, choosing the dragon over the compromise. "Come then," Barristan said softly, "come and see what it costs to face a man who has finally found something worth dying for." They came. Later, hours or days or years later, time having lost meaning, Doran would remember seeing Ser Barristan fall. Not falling like a tree cut down, but falling like a king, stepping down from a throne, surrounded by bodies, his sword still raised, his last breath spent, not in a scream, but in defiance. The sortie retreated in good order, having destroyed supply wagons and trebuchets, having bloodied the enemy and proven that Meereen would not surrender quietly. They rode back through the gates with fewer than half their original numbers, but they rode back as victors of a kind. Grey Worm met them in the plaza, his face as impassive as ever, but something like respect in his eyes. "You have given them pause. They will not assault the walls today. Perhaps not for many days." Doran dismounted, his legs nearly giving way, and looked back at the plain where smoke rose from burning camps. Somewhere out there, Ser Barristan Selmy lay among the enemy dead he had made, his sword probably still clutched in his hand, his final duty finally fulfilled. That night, in the Great Pyramid, Doran opened the white book copy that Barristan had kept. The last entry was dated that morning. "In the 300th year after Aegon's conquest, I rode out against impossible odds to defend people I had no oath to protect, in a city I had no duty to hold, for a queen who had flown away on dragon's wings. I chose this fight. After 47 years of serving those who did not deserve my service, I finally found a cause worthy of my death. May the Seven judge me not by the oaths I broke, or the silence I kept, but by this final stand, when an old knight who had served badly finally served well." Doran closed the book and wept. 3 months later, ravens brought news. Daenerys Targaryen lived. She was returning to Meereen with a Dothraki Khalasar at her back. The siege had been lifted 2 weeks prior, the enemy armies withdrawing after taking losses they had not anticipated, facing defences more determined than they had expected. Meereen still stood. And in the pyramid's crypts, where the honoured dead were laid to rest, a simple stone marker bore an inscription in both common tongue and Giscari. "Here lies Ser Barristan Selmy, who broke no oath that mattered." The wheel turned, the songs were sung, the stories told, and an old knight's last tour was complete.